the day of the Lord. 12 months ago, as we began the Advent season, the Scriptures spoke to us about the day of the Lord. As we finish our liturgical year, Jesus is again speaking to his disciples about the day of the Lord. In the Scriptures, Jesus comes into the temple, and he first listens, and then he speaks something terribly important. As Jesus enters the temple, what he hears, people are speaking about the magnificence of the temple. If you've been to the Holy Land, you know that all that is left of the temple is what they call the Western Wall, the Wailing Wall. It's actually the western part of the foundation for the Temple Mount. The Temple Mount was a massive piece of land. They say about 3 times the size of Millennium Park, a very large piece of land in the center of Jerusalem. And upon this mount was the temple itself. There's a wall surrounding the entire mount. They said actually 10 stories high. And within the mount itself, the Temple Mount, there were different courts. The court for the Gentiles. Even the Gentiles could come up onto the Temple Mount. And then the court of the women. And then in the center part, the center court, was the temple itself, the Holy of Holies. And only the high priest could go in there. It was the great place of worship for the people of old. 3 times a year they would come to Jerusalem to the Temple Mount. And as Jesus came onto the Temple Mount, he heard the people speaking of the magnificence of this Temple Mount. If Jesus came today, he might hear us speaking about our temples. Maybe the temple of Soldiers Field, or Wrigley Field, or the United Center, or even Guaranteed Rate Park. Meaning the temple of the sports world today. You know how often people are speaking about the sports of today. Not just the professional teams, but parents know how much time and energy and conversation goes around this temple of the sport world. Or he might hear us speaking of the temple of Wall Street. You know how we watch what happens on Wall Street. They say the financial center of our economy. All of us in different ways, we might not only speak about, but even worry about what happens on Wall Street. The temple for some of our lives. The temples that we share today, we might all be speaking about them. When the Lord hears the people speaking about the temple, he says something very important. He says, in the day of the Lord, none of this will exist. No stone will even survive on this huge Temple Mount, even to us. All the temples that we worship at. In the day of the Lord, they will not exist. He says there will be things that will happen that will be shocking in some ways. There will be things that will shake the earth. There will be people who come claiming in their name to be the one that everyone was waiting for. There will be wars. There will be persecution. All of this before the day of the Lord. But then he says, and when the day of the Lord comes, not a hair on your head will be harmed. There's something about the day of the Lord that is not destructive at all. Something about the day of the Lord that we all wait for. And it will come, he says, to those who are steadfast, those who hang in there. We all know about the journey of our lives. They say there are two great temptations along the way in the journey. For Jesus, for his disciples, for all of us. There are things about traveling the journey that along the way we can be tempted to lose confidence. To lose confidence in where it all began. The journey always begins in the same place. It begins with a deep sense of God's love, his care for each of us. It was true for the people of old, Abraham, the father of all of our faith. God's presence and God's love was there at the very beginning. It was there for Moses in a burning bush. God's presence, God's love from the very beginning. It was there in Jesus, in his first public event, as he came out of the water. He heard the voice, "You are my beloved. On you my favor rests." It always begins in the same place, but along the way the temptation is very real. That we begin to lose confidence. God's love, his presence, is really there. And the second great temptation, they say, on the journey is to lose heart. It didn't take long for the people of old who had been promised that God, through Moses, would lead them to a new land. They get out of the desert, and we read they begin to grumble because of the elements. Did you bring us out here to die? They begin to lose heart. It happens at different times, in different ways. These are the temptations against faith and against hope. Jesus says, not a hair on your head will be harmed. For those who remain steadfast, those who can hang in there, those who continue to believe, to have faith, those who continue to trust and have hope, to be steadfast along the way. And in the day of the Lord, when the Lord does come, not just at the end of time, but in all of our lives, when the Lord comes, his love embraces us, and not a hair on our head is harmed. The day of the Lord. It begins the journey of Advent, and we conclude today our season of ordinary time. The day of the Lord. It is so important. And when we celebrate the day of the Lord, not a hair on our head